We finished up with the first two blessings of the Amidah, and we talked about God in history, God in nature. And what I wanted to do to start today is go back and look at the structure first. We did this at the very beginning, but I think now it'll have greater meaning to you as we're reflecting back on a lot of what we're doing. And we'll do it again at the end of the course. So again, you'll have that sense of how it all plays together. So I gave you a couple pages that look a little bit like this, okay? All right, it's a Shabbat morning service. I wanted to review first a preliminary service and what we've covered in the terms of two sections, Birchot HaShachar, the morning blessings, the Psalms and the songs of the second section. We had that opening series of 15 blessings that dealt with each of the moments in our morning routines and the appreciation for the gifts that are returned to us every morning. The embedded Shema text, this text study, and then the Kaddish in all its different forms. Then the Psalms for the day, Baruch She'emar and Yishtabach, which are the surrounding blessings that enclose all the different Psalms that are in the book. We finished with Ashrei and the last 5 Psalms, which are symbolic way of representing that the rabbis used to read the entire book of Psalms every single day before they even started praying. And so we just read the last 6, symbolically doing that, engaging in that behavior. And then Chatzi Kaddish is that comma in the service, because the preliminary is not really a service. Without an Amidah, you don't have a service. Okay, so it leads into the Shacharit. We did Baruch Hu. We looked at Shema and its blessings and the blessing of creation. And there we looked at good and evil because God is creator of everything. The rejection of dualism and idolatry. The Kedusha, as it shows up in the opening blessing as a way of being able to say it if we don't have a minyan. We talk about the angels doing it instead of we doing it. And then the shift of or, of light, from its literal sense of God is creator of light, to or chadash, where there it becomes a new light, but we're not talking about a physical sun, we're talking about enlightenment. We then went into the blessing of God's love expressed through the gift of Torah. We talked about the Shema itself, and then the blessing of redemption. We're now on the next page, the Amidah. We've gone through God in nature, God in history, God in nature, the 3 blessings of praise, and that's where we are at this point. Okay, we'll continue through this, but again, I think in addition to dealing with the theological issues that are here, it's important to understand the structure, that it's not just a series of God, of talking about God and saying it again and saying it again and saying it again. There's a real structure to what's going on here. All right, that's our intro for today. I want to spend most of our time today on the 3rd and 4th blessings of the Amidah. The 3rd blessing is Kedusha. The 4th blessing on Shabbat is the blessing of Shabbat. And so I've given you a page of the text of the Amidah. Steve, do you have it in front of you or not? Steve Rubin? I don't know. Okay. David Finger, do you have it in front of you? It looks like that. There you go. It's up on the screen now. All right, David, would you read the beginning of it for us? The first couple lines there, and we're talking about the English. Yeah.
We proclaim your holiness on earth as it is proclaimed in heaven above. We sing the words of heavenly voices as recorded in your prophet's vision. Holy, 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 Hashem Tzvaot, the grandeur of the world is God's glory.
Okay, and then the next one as well, the next page, the next 2 lines.
In thundering chorus, majestic voices resound, lifted towards singing seraphim and responding. Praised is Hashem's glory throughout the universe.
All right, now, Steve, we'll switch over to you, and if you'll read the last 2 paragraphs at the bottom of this page. You've got, throughout. Mr. Rubin, you got to unmute. That's the hard part. All right. You get it or not? Okay, there you go. Okay. Throughout your universe.
Throughout your universe, reveal yourself, our sovereign, and reign over us, for we await you. When will you reign in Zion? Let it be soon in our time and throughout all time. May your glory and holiness be apparent to all in Jerusalem, your city, from generation to generation eternally. May we see your sovereignty described in David's Psalms, which sing of you, of your splendor.
Okay.
Hashem shall reign through all generations. You don't want me to read that?
Yeah, please.
Hashem shall reign through all generations. Zion, your God, shall reign forever. Hallelujah.
And the last one there, we declare.
We declare your greatness through all generations. Hallow your holiness to all eternity. Your praise will never leave our lips, for you are God and sovereign, great and holy. Praise are you, Hashem, holy God.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is take this text apart. Okay. Again, our first two blessings emphasize God's role in our world, both historically and in the power of God within nature, our rational understandings of God. This blessing, which is in a sense the highlight. If the Amidah is the core of all prayer, the Kedusha is the core of the Amidah. This is the centerpiece, and it addresses essentially the sublime, the mysterious nature of God, those aspects that are beyond our understanding and beyond our comprehension. God is holy at the end of the day. God is kadosh and beyond any comprehension. And so, Sandy, there's reading number one. Rabbi Judah Halevi gives a telling account of this distinctive nature of this third blessing when he reads it in the Kuzari. All right, so reading number one.
Having read these paragraphs, which enlighten him in the belief that God keeps up a connection with this material world, the worshiper extols and sanctifies him by the declaration that no corporeal attitude pertains to him.
Okay, thank you. And Maya, if you'll go back to the Kedusha text, that would be great. All right, so many prayers deal with this concept of sanctification. You have the word Kaddish, Kiddush, Kiddush, Kaddish, Kedusha, Kedushim, weddings, okay? This concept of holiness infuses our most core prayers, and in almost every case, with the exception of the Kiddush, because there it's not practical all the time, you need a minyan, okay? It's not an accident. Often, Kadosh is translated as holy, but it really implies a specialness or a being set aside for a particular purpose. It means unique. It means distinct, something which leads us to a higher spiritual end. And ultimately, holiness is God's essence and indefinable quality. Whatever God is, that's what holiness is. All right? That's an important, think of that concept. Whatever God is, that's what it means to be holy. And God is inherently holy. We don't make him so. Rather, in this prayer, we're not saying, well, God, what we're talking about is God, we are announcing God's holiness to the world so that we can note it and respond accordingly. All right. As human beings, we believe that Jewish law provides us with this opportunity to imitate God and to strive for Kedusha ourselves. By following Jewish law, which by traditional understanding is the word of God, we can emulate God and also achieve an element of God's holiness. Leviticus 19 tells us that we are to be kadosh, you shall be holy, and sets out a series of regulations that includes both ethics and morals. Every mitzvah we fulfill, every time we do a mitzvah, it is intended to make us distinct, separate, and holy. We are told in the text, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. All right. Gail Toland, would you read for us reading number 2? And for this, you're going to have, Maya, you need to scroll up a little bit and then come back. Reading number 2. Gail, do you have it? It's on the screen also. You just need to unmute. There you go.
I thought I did.
You just did. Yes, you did
I
that.
started reading it. Okay. The main characteristic of the virtue of man's holiness is that man thereby elevates himself to the point where all of his efforts and considerations are not directed toward his own needs, but for the glory of the master of the universe, for his holiness, for the fulfillment of the Creator's will. As long as man thinks only of perfecting himself, even spiritually, no Kedusha is attained.
And again, I want to keep emphasizing that point. One of the goals of prayer is to get you out of yourself, to stop thinking about your own needs and to focus on God. All right? How can we serve God by our actions in the community? It's not to repair myself, although there's an element of that that's always underlying, because you can't really serve others unless you've done that. But that's not the goal, that's the means. All right? Also, as a note, this concept of holiness. Holiness in Judaism is not something, and it's very different from other religions, relegated to a priest, to a rabbi, or a cantor. Any Jew can attain holiness by imitating God through the mitzvot. The mitzvot are the tool for achieving holiness. All right? And Jewish tradition, just to make that, how powerful that is, teaches that causing others to recognize God, to proclaim his holiness, and to engage in mitzvot, the very act of encouraging others to do that is one of holiness itself. All right, so let's now take apart the Kedusha. If you can go, Maya, to the top of, to Nikadesh. There you go, the top section. Nikadesh Shimcha Ba'olam. We will declare your name, we will sanctify your name forever, as it is sanctified in the heavens above, as it is written by your prophet, and they call to one another, saying, okay? The focus, the center of all of these, of the Kedusha, are the lines that I put in yellow. It is the three prophetic texts, Kadosh, 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 Baruch Shem Kavod, and Yimloch Hashem Leolam. Those are the three, that's the core of this message here. Everything else is sort of extra verses around it, and then it finishes up with the blessing at the end, El HaKadosh, God who is holy. At the beginning of the 2nd century of the Common Era, a variety of verses, this Nikadesh, for example, is added to the text. You have here in Shachri, you have Nikadesh Shimcha. In Musaf, you have Na'aritzacha v'Nagdishacha. They're invitations to the community to say, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Join with me, all right? We declare, we sanctify God's name eternally. How do we do that? By saying Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. All right, we thunderous music, chorus, majestic voices. We respond, and then we respond with Baruch Shem Kavod. All right, so you have here a series of introductions to each of these verses, which really are meant to be a welcoming and an invitation to participate. A stylistic note. All right, if you look at the top line, there's a couple things I want to point out here. Bishmei Marom at the end. Bishmei is in the heavens of the high. In a sense, what you've got here is the same word twice. It's emphasizing the heaven of heavens. It's a typical biblical style where two words which are essentially synonymous are juxtaposed to express a superlative. So, for example, you have Melech Malchei Hamlachim, the King of Kings. You're stating it's at the ultimate level of whatever it is, the kingship, the heavenliness, whatever it is. The biblical style is to use the same word, in a sense, twice. Is there a question? Okay. So this line, Kadosh, 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 I want to take this apart. It's a prophetic vision of Isaiah's in the temple in Jerusalem. He is praying, and in the middle of his prayer, he has a vision in which he is surrounded by angels. And the angels are moving their wings and singing, Holy, 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 Adonai Tzivaot. The world is filled with his glory. Okay? Not only are we declaring that God is above man and his world, but even the angels are making that statement. They too recognize that God is above and beyond their world as well. This is all of this is very difficult to understand. It's very poetic. It's mysterious, and it's meant to be. Remember, I said to you, this is the sublime. This is what we don't fully understand about God. There's so much we won't know. And in a sense, there's a power to the mystery about life. I can tell you that when I learned to translate the service, some of the mystery went away. Sometimes there's a power to speaking words that you don't fully grasp. And once you get it, it seems more mundane. This is meant to emphasize that which is lost there is no mundane in the Kedusha. It's completely above and beyond. A couple notes that are important here I want to point out. When Israel was under the Byzantine Christian rule, sometime in the 5th century, 6th century, Kedusha was permitted for Jews to say, as opposed to the Shema. Remember I said to you, the Shema was not allowed, but they forbid Jews to say Shema, but they came in and they said, yes, you can say Kedusha. Why? Because they saw Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh as a reference to a Trinity.
Huh.
Okay? The fact that it's repeated, anytime they could see 3 times something is said, it automatically became a reference to the Trinity. I also, if you would go down by a little bit, just so, I'm sorry, up, so we can see the Nikadesh line. There's also, in a sense, sometimes through the play of words, there's a beauty that can't be conveyed in a translation. And you have a multiple use of this shin mem root. First in shimcha, your name, kishem is name, shemak dishim as is, as we declare God's glory, and bishmei hashemayim, bishmei marom. So you have nikadesh, shimcha ba'olam kishem, shemak dishim oto bishmei marom. There's a beauty to the poetry that was here that you're not going to find when you translate it into English and gets lost. I wanted to point that out, and I highlighted it in red so you couldn't miss it. We then get to the second verse, Baruch Kavod Adonai Mim Komo. All right, these are the words that Ezekiel, who I'm convinced was on drugs, Ezekiel heard these words heard carried by rushing winds and spoken by the heavenly hosts. All right, and he talks about God's glory. Praised is the glory of God in his place. Or how do they translate it here? Throughout the universe. All right, yeah, that's not quite what it's. Makom is a place, but in his place, and since his place means every place, they translated as universe. Okay, that works. All right. The question becomes, what exactly, we talked about the problem of translating kadosh, holiness. How do we translate kavod, honor, glory? Okay. Abraham Joshua Heschel says this following. Is this in, let me just look to see if this is in your readings. I don't think it is. He says, he identifies this kavod, this holiness, or glory rather, with God's goodness. He says, honor and glory equals goodness. And why does he say that? He goes back to Exodus in another verse where it says, Abraham says to God, let me behold your kavod. Let me behold your presence. And God's answer is, I will make all my goodness pass before you. So based on a verse in Exodus, Heschel is making an equation of of glory equaling goodness. Another play on this word kavod, however, comes from the fact that it's the same root as kaved, which means heavy. Kavod then implies God's heaviness, his weightiness, the importance of it, the very existence, the power, the ubiquitous presence of God in human life. And so it's not God's might alone that we're proclaiming, because power is morally neutral and can be used for brutal ends. It's rather the moral character of God's power that we're acknowledging. And thus the two meanings of kavod can be complementary, kavod and kaved, when we proclaim, what we're proclaiming is God's power and his goodness. Couple more things to point out. If we just go up a little bit into the Minkomcha paragraph. Again, I've said to you a number of times, the way one can understand whether a chazan is doing what he should be doing is how he is dealing with the Perush Hamilim. So I want to show you the beginning of this here. Minkomcha, from your place, our King Malkenu. Okay, we want you to reveal yourself. Tofia v'timloch aleinu, and to rule over us. And then you get to the words ki mechakim. We are waiting for you. And I will tell you that almost every time I sing this, I take the word mechakim, this waiting, and I stretch it out. That's where I will add some extra notes, etc., to convey that sense of we're waiting. Right? There's a delay going on here. I think those are important little messages that as you go through the prayers and you listen to somebody daven, you get a good sense of, does the person leading really have a sense of what they're doing by the way their singing reflects Perush Hamilim, the meaning of what's going on. The last thing I want a couple more things. At the very end, you have at the bottom of the page here. Let me get rid of this. Ha'el HaKadosh. Okay. The message. All of this is about the blessing. Everything we do is about the blessing at the end. We finish up with blessings. Here it's Ha'el HaKadosh. When we do this silently, the Amidah, we don't say Kedusha. We skip it, but there's a section there, Atah Kadosh, you are Kadosh, that ends with the exact same blessing, Baruch Atah Ha'el HaKadosh. And so what we're doing is we are saying the blessing, which is the core, but the whole lead up is a modified, shortened version. And this is something we do. I suspect that there were multiple versions of this for many years. The same way in the evening service, there's two blessings that we finish in the morning and the evening. Oh, I'm sorry, in Modim. Let me use Modim as a different example. In the Amidah later, we have Modim, and there's two different versions of it. Okay? There's one that is said by the Chazan, and there's one that's said by the congregation. And there's two blessings of creation, one in the evening and one in the morning. There's two blessings of revelation, one in the evening and one in the morning. And my suspicion, and I'm not alone in this, is two different versions were written, and they found a way to use both at different times. Kedusha itself has gone through changes and additions. This is, as I just said to you, in the 2nd century, they added a lot of things. The most important change and most significant change happened in the Musaf Kedusha, and that's the addition of Shema Yisrael. We sing Shema in the Musaf Kedusha. Okay? It's right after Kivodom Alei Olam, and then we sing Shema. All right. This addition originated again in the 6th century. We're talking about Byzantine Christians who were forbidding Jews to say the Shema. And so they would send officers into the temple at the time when Shema was being recited to confirm that it would not get said. And so what the rabbis did, I've said this to you before, is they concealed the reciting of the Shema in other places. When the officers would leave, when they knew it had to be recited by a certain time, and so they put it later, so in a sense, even by using just this one line in Kedusha, it's a reminder of we would have said it had we been allowed. And again, once something gets added, it never gets taken out. That's just the nature of life. All right. What I want to do now are some of the practices. I want you to know how do you say Kedusha? Because there are some traditions here that are specific. It's meant to say to you, this is the core of what we're doing. The first thing is we stand, and we stand with our feet together. You may not move your feet for any reason unless your life is literally at stake during Kedusha. If you see somebody leading the Amidah and from the Bima and they don't have their feet together, they missed. Okay? 2 reasons. 1, as I said to you, we're emulating we're declaring that God's Kedusha, we're saying God's Kedusha as the angels do. We emulate a verse in Ezekiel where it says, and their feet were straight together. Okay? Now again, technically your feet should be together for the entire Amidah when you say it silently. The cantor has to have his feet together through the entire repetition. He's not allowed to move, even if there are readings and sermons and whatever else. He's not literally allowed to move. I described to you that on Rosh Hashanah, when I was in Dallas, I would stand there for 2.5 to 3 hours because the rabbi would give a sermon. I couldn't move. The people would come up and do English readings. I couldn't move. All right? That is the traditional way of doing this. All right. Second interpretation, and this one means more to me, to be honest with you, is that we're conveying that we have no place to go. There is nothing more to be focused on at this moment. And so we don't lift our feet. We have no place to run elsewhere. Rather, it's our resolve to stand straight and erect and turning all our thoughts and actions and desires to God. Right? So the key message is there during the Amidah. The congregation sits or can stand for the first two blessings of the Amidah. When they get to Kedusha, you put your feet together and stand through it. When you finish Kedusha, the rest of the congregation sings, but the cantor continues with his feet together, not moving. Okay? Secondly, that's the first process of first way in which we recite Kedusha. The second is, again, all interruptions during the Kedusha are to be avoided. There never are English readings during Kedusha. We don't do them. We don't break it up. All right, you won't hear the rabbi say, and we continue with the third paragraph. We go all the way through Kedusha without any kind of interruption. And, okay, and so if you already, we have people who will come, for example, from an Orthodox synagogue. They've prayed at home, and then they get to the synagogue because they don't want to pray with women per se. That's their shtick, that's their whatever their thing is. But they get to our synagogue. Or if you've already prayed on your own, or for example, there are times I'll lead a minyan and I have to do it again. If you've already prayed and you find yourself in the presence of a minyan and Kedusha is being said, you need to join it again. Even if you said it. The rest of the Amidah, you don't. Kedusha, you join with the congregation. All right? If somebody goes to the men's room or the ladies' room and comes back in and Kedusha is being said, stop everything you're doing and say Kedusha. If you're doing your private Amidah and you haven't finished, all right, when we get to Kedusha, stop your private davening, concentrate on the Kedusha as it's repeated, but you don't say the words. You just listen, and when it's finished, you go back and complete your Amidah. This is giving you a sense of the centrality of this one blessing. Even if, the third one, even if you happen to be present and you're not praying, all right? You're at a ball game, and somewhere in the middle of a minyan breaks out, you get to Kedusha, you join with them. Kedusha is meant to be the focus. And during Kedusha, no one should ever enter or leave the sanctuary. Now again, there's a tendency, because we're standing, people feel they're less noticeable, so they'll walk in or out. But that's exactly the reason we're standing. People are standing, that's the moment you're not allowed to go in and out. They're conveying a message that this is core. All right, going on. When we say the words of Kadosh, 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 it's customary, thank you. It's good. Maya knows her stuff. This is good. All right. When we say those three words, it is traditional to look upward towards heaven and to rise on our toes 3 times. You'll see people sort of lift up 3 times as if the wings of the angels are lifting our feet and we rise up to heaven. Support for this concept of doing this can be found in Sefer Hechalot, which is reading number 3. And Leslie, would you do reading number 3 for us? And that's further down, Maya.
You shall tell my children what I do while they are sanctifying and saying Kadosh, Kadosh, and teach them that their eyes should be looking upwards to the heavens, to the house of prayer, and they should lift themselves upwards, as my greatest pleasure in this world is when they look up towards my eyes and my eyes look towards theirs.
Okay, so you've got a symbolic nature of trying to connect with God here, of rising above everything, reaching for the spark of God within ourselves. All right. There's also sorts of Talmudic discussions. I stand behind Eliezer when we're actually in the sanctuary, and I will see that he actually jumps 3 times. There is a Talmudic discussion. There are some who forbid you to do that. There are some who say that's what you should do. We're Jews. We don't always agree on everything. All right. So either way, there's this essence of trying to rise up to make the connection with God in a symbolic way. Some people do, and I do this as well. I rise up when you say Baruch Kavod, the second line, and Yimloch at the third line as well. Some people will also get up on their toes. And then, and the last thing to note is in the line Nikadesh at the top there, you have at the end Vikara Ze El Ze V'Yamar, right before Kadosh Kadosh. It's as is recorded in by your prophets. They say one to the other, we bow to the left and to the right. It's as if sort of recognizing that everybody is doing this together. Now, as I mentioned to you before, the full Kedusha we have here is only recited out loud when we do the repetition of the Amidah, and only if we have a minyan.
Cantor.
Part of the silent Amidah, because Kiddush Hashem, the sense of Kedusha, is a public act which can only be done in the presence of a community. And to give you some of that, reading number 4, Maya, at the bottom there.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you to do that because I have that moment.
All right, Robert, would you read for us the top paragraph, the Gemara Brachot 21b? So said. It's on the screen if you can't find it.
Where is it? Oh,
Reading
21.
number
I'm
4.
sorry. Yeah. So said Rav Ada Bar Ahava. From where do we know that one praying by oneself does not say Kedusha? Because it says, I will be sanctified among the children of Yisrael. Vayikra 22:32. Every davar
Should be Kedusha. Every matter of holiness
requires 10.
Okay. And Dave Wolf, would you read the second one, another Gemara? Where it says, how is this derived? This is a different Gemara, right? I don't see him. Okay, let's see who's here. Trying to see who I don't know who. I see a lot of blank screens. I'm not sure who's here and who's not. Okay. Ilana, would you read it? You need to unmute. You need to unmute yourself. Okay. If you can't, if you're struggling, don't worry about it. I'll read it. Don't worry about it. It's okay. How is this derived? Rabbi Chia taught we draw an analogy between two occurrences of the word among. It is written here, I will be sanctified among the children of Israel. That's what we read before. And it is written elsewhere, separate yourselves from among the congregation. Then we draw an analogy between two occurrences of the word congregation. It is written elsewhere, how long must this congregation abide? Just as it is in this case, there were 10 scouts who slandered the land, so too we require 10. In other words, how do we define a congregation? And here he's giving you a source of 10. The 10 spies were referred to as a congregation. So therefore, 10 is the number. We know we need 10 because the first one says, I'll be sanctified among. So it's giving you the idea of why 10 and why we need a community. All right. So I'm gonna unmute everybody and ask for questions on the Kedusha itself, and then we'll go on.
Okay.
Any questions on Kedusha?
To start.
Cantor,
Yes, ma'am.
it's Leslie. When in the very beginning with the Nikadesh, that paragraph, Vayikra Zel El Zev Amar, and we
Right.
turn left to right. The fact that we're singing with heavenly voices or we are imitating them.
Yes.
Which one?
Yes.
Oh, that sounds like an answer I get from my children.
There you go. The answer is, I mean, here technically, Nick Kadesh says we are declaring the sanctification. So here it really is us, but there is an element of doing this together with the angels that's at play.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Yes,
The meaning
Cantor?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi. Just a question. As far as the number 10 for a congregation, there is, of course, that's a complicated issue. But is there, are there other, I imagine that there are other places where
Yes.
it refers to that, right? I mean,
Yeah, so look, the rabbis went looking anytime they had a question, where do they turn? They turn to Torah to find sources of for what they're looking for an answer, the answers they're looking for. So one was the 10 spies. I've also heard, for example, when God negotiates with Abraham in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, he negotiates with him. He says 50 yes, 40 yes, 30 yes, 20 yes, 10 yes, and then God walks away. God basically says, you ain't got 10, we're not talking.
okay.
Right? That's another example of where 10 seems to play out as a minimum number to make any kind of decision. There certainly are others as well. And 10 is the numerology in the Bible is often very symbolic. Again, whether or not it's 10, the same thing like I said to you, 40 means a lot. Did we actually wander in the desert for 40 years? Who knows? Was Moses on the mountain for 40 days? Who knows? Did it rain for 40? How come it's never 41 or 39? There's a symbolic nature to these numbers, but the rabbis would turn to the text and look for reasons to make sense out of the biblical text as its source for coming up with a conclusion. So I've given you 2 on the 10.
Thank you.
Okay? Yes,
Yeah.
Sandy.
Adonai Tzvaot.
Yeah.
Can you translate that, or
Yeah, so yes, I can. And remember, I mentioned to you that there are times in which the authors of our texts, and I don't mean the biblical rabbis, rabbinic rabbis, I mean the ones who wrote our particular prayer book, deliberately did not translate something because they didn't want to get into the controversy of it. Tzivaot is often translated as hosts. Adonai Tzivaot, Lord of hosts. But it's Tzava is an army. It's the Lord of army. It's God taking up, God leading the people in their battles. And so rather than get into the struggles of what that implies, they simply left it as Hashem Tzivaot. They didn't translate it. Because in the modern world, those are uncomfortable concepts. The reality of it is, the world is, I don't know that there's ever been a day in the world's history where there wasn't war. All right? And certainly as Jews, we've struggled and needed God to lead us, whether it's in physical war, whether it's in emotional response to the persecution we've experienced. We've needed God to be at the forefront. And so, ours is a time that is unique in Jewish history. And so we are the freaks of Jewish history, okay? We are the ones that are different. The fact is we're not under this. And so it's easy for us to say, well, I don't want to think of God in those terms. That's an easy thing to do. But we are unique. We're not in a normal time in Jewish history. All right. Any other questions? All right, I'm going to go on. So we've dealt with now the first 3. There's nothing more here, Maya, in the notes. I forgot to give the translation for the next section. I'll translate it for you as we go. All right. So, trying to get that. All right. Let's see. There we go. I got more faces this way. All right. On a weekday, we go from the 3 blessings of praising God. We've now praised God in history. We've praised God in nature. We've praised the sublime, that which we don't understand. We then turn to God and say, now that we've told you how wonderful you are, we switch to petitionary prayer. Oh, by the way, we need. Okay? It's like I said to you before, it's like the kid who wants to borrow something from dad and says, Dad, I love your tie. What a wonderful tie you're wearing. Oh, by the way, can I borrow the car? So what we've done is we've buttered God up pretty good so far. And the middle blessings of the Amidah then turn to a series of petitions. The 4th through the 16th blessing are all communal requests. There's nothing there that says I need. It's we need for things such as wisdom, the opportunity to repent, health, and peace. There's a whole series of requests that are all about communal needs. Now, there's one about health, on the weekday where you can insert a section that talks about particular people that you're asking God to heal. But it's an insertion. The core prayer is all in the plural. Right? It is a way of getting out of our own needs and getting out of our own heads and looking at the world around us and saying, how do we repair it? Because we're asking God for help at this moment, you'll notice, you go to weekday minion, you'll notice this is where we turn and pass around the tzedakah box. If we're going to turn to God for help, we're going to say we're going to help others too. We're going to emulate exactly what we're turning to God for, right? So we pass the tzedakah box, and people make contributions as a way of aiding the world around them. Now, I want to point something out. Anytime you talk about requests of God, and this is a difficult issue, there are times, no matter how much we want it, the answer is simply no. All right? We may not understand why the answer is no. We may not understand the silence of what's going on, but it's in this way that prayer differs from magic. Magic, by definition, must produce a desired result. Prayer does not. And what this does is it keeps us from understanding God. I love this analogy. I don't remember where I saw it. God is not a cosmic vending machine. Put in a prayer and get what you want. We don't know why. We don't know God's wisdom. At the end of the day, it's Dayan HaEmet. God is the ultimate judge, and we don't understand. God is not a vending machine where we can just get what we want if we just say the magic words. Right? I think that's an important concept. That's the weekday Amidah. On Shabbat, there are no requests. The Shabbat Amidah is shorter. Instead of having those 13 requests in the middle, there's only one blessing. All right? It's Mikadesh HaShabbat, who sanctifies Shabbat. The first three blessings of praise, the last three blessings that we'll deal with in a little while of thanks, are essentially the same throughout the year. There's a couple insertions that get put here and there, but those are essentially the same, whether it's weekday, Shabbat, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, whether it's Shavuot. The structure of those three are identical throughout the year. What distinguishes one Amidah from the other is what happens in between. On Shabbat, there's one blessing for Shabbat. On Shlosh Regalim, on the three festivals, there's three blessings. There's one blessing about Hazmanim, about the festivals. On Rosh Hashanah, there are three blessings. We call them Malchuyot, Zichronot, and Shofrot. Okay? We know where we are in the year by that, what happens between the first three and the last three blessings.
Cantor?
Yes, ma'am.
Question. So is it on Shabbos we don't do the petitioning? Is
Right.
that because we don't want God to work on Shabbos because he's supposed to be resting, or she's supposed to be resting?
Well, that sounds like as good a drosh as any.
Okay.
But I think it's more about we should not be asking for things. We shouldn't be in a mode of recognizing what's missing in our life on Shabbat, but rather be in a place where we're appreciative for what we have in our lives. 6 days a week you can turn to God. 1 day a week in terms of asking. 1 day a week it's time to say, I'm thankful.
Okay.
Okay? Again, that's a Levine drosh.
Okay, good Drosh.
Okay? So instead on Shabbat, we have this fourth and middle bracha, which declares the Shabbat to be one of the fundamental institutions of Judaism. Okay? If at the end of the day, if you were to say, what would I ask people to do? If I said to them to be a Jew, what are the two, I would say two things that you would do. I would give you two of them. Shabbat and Kashrut. If you were to observe those two, the likelihood is you'll get to the others at some point. Those are the core practices of a Jew, Shabbat and Kashrut. And as a matter of fact, when they've done studies to see whether or not Judaism transfers to the following generation, the number one predictor is Kashrut. The number two predictor is Shabbat. And it's not a surprise, because Kashrut is something that you do every single day of your life. Shabbat is something you do every single week of your life. right? And so those are the predictors of the greatest predictors of whether or not Judaism will continue over the generations. Number one is kashrut. Number two is Shabbat. So Shabbat is a core institution, all right? And this bracha consists in our text of 4 paragraphs. The first one, Yismach Moshe. It describes Moses as a faithful servant who rejoices in his role. We're told that he brings down the tablets from Sinai on which were inscribed the commandment to observe the Shabbat, and God places a crown of glory on his head. Okay? The first thing to note in this paragraph is it's astounding to find Moses mentioned in our prayers. The only other place I know of is the Seder. Moses is not mentioned in our prayers. Judaism has attempted to humanize its heroes and goes out of its way not to mention the people like this in the prayers, unless there's we're trying to claim zechut avot, that we want their merit, but we make a point of saying they're not gods. And here, when it does mention Moses, it goes out of his way to call him an Eved. All right? He is a servant. It's also translated as a slave. Avadim hayinu. Moses is nothing more than God's personal servant. The greatest of all the prophets is nothing more than God's servant. It's a powerful message. All right? Yismach Moshe. Moses is happy, but not chelko, with the gift of his portion. He Eved Ne'eman. He was a faithful servant. That's the message there. All right, so we finish this up by saying he brought down the tablets from Sinai on which was inscribed the commandment to observe Shabbat. And so you would think that what would follow this paragraph would be the 4th commandment. And instead we find Vishamru, another biblical verse. On my screen just popped up Kelly Clarkson files for divorce.
What?
All right.
She didn't have a prayer.
She didn't have no prayers, right?
Kadosh.
Kadosh, there you go. Instead of finding the 4th commandment, we find one of 10 other places in which there's a command that Jews observe Shabbat. All right. And again, this is the same thing that what the rabbis were doing. This is earlier. This is in the time of, even before Mishnaic times, probably the 1st century, the 2nd century, maybe Mishnaic. Let's talk Mishnaic times. Okay. The message was by the Christians in the world around them, the only laws that matter are the 10 commandments. The rest are to be disposed of. The rabbis were saying, absolutely not. There are 613 commandments. They all are applicable. And therefore, they went out of their way to de-emphasize the 10. Instead of finding the 4th commandment, where we just said Moses brings down the tablet on which it's commanded Shabbat, instead of reading the 4th commandment, we read Vishamru. And Vishamru is the people of Israel observe Shabbat to maintain it as an everlasting covenant forever, for all generations. It is a sign between me and the people of Israel for all time. 6 days God made the heavens and the earth. 7th day he rested. Okay? So they deliberately chose this paragraph as opposed to the 4th commandment. And I want one other thing to point out here. Remember, I mentioned to you, it serves as an oti liolam. It is an eternal sign. It is a symbol, all right, of the acceptance of the covenant. The reason I'm pointing this out, on Shabbat, we don't wear tefillin. 6 days a week, we do. Tefillin is referred to as an ot, a sign, a symbol. Shabbat replaces it. Shabbat is the sign on Saturday. Tefillin is the sign the other 6 days of the week. So tefillin become redundant in this model on Shabbat. Also want to point out that here we have, again, Shabbat observance as it's listed here and in the 4th commandment in Exodus, the concept of imitatio Dei, of imitating God. We rest on the 7th day because God rested on the 7th day. But of note, I do want to point out that in the 10 Commandments in Deuteronomy, that is not said. In Deuteronomy, it links the Shabbat to the Exodus from Egypt. Remember the Exodus. It's not remember the creation. So we don't know exactly why that's true. But nonetheless, there are two versions of the 10 Commandments, the one in Exodus and the one in Deuteronomy. There are other places where it changes. Again, the beginning of the fourth commandment, one says Zachor, remember, the other one says Shamor, observe. Okay? In one, in honoring the parents, it's a brief statement. In the one in Deuteronomy, it gives you a reason to observe, to honor your parents. It doesn't in Exodus. Don't know why, but I just wanted to leave that out there. One more note. Beini uvein bnei Yisrael, between me and the children of Israel. Rabbi Yochanan taught that this phrase in Talmud taught that this phrase was used to indicate the special nature of Shabbat among all the other mitzvot, and that God gave all of the other mitzvot publicly. But what he's saying, his interpretation here, is that Shabbat was given privately between me and the children of Israel. Tradition teaches that if all the Jews in the world would observe one Shabbat together at the same time, we would bring redemption to the world. There is a special obligation of Jews in terms of Shabbat. Shabbat has been our guardian throughout history. Whatever circumstances we have found, when you watch movies about Europe and you see all the poverty and the suffering, and then they show Shabbat, it's almost like a withdrawal from all the suffering. It's a step away. And as a result, Achad Ha'am said, more than Israel has kept the Shabbat, Shabbat has kept Israel. We have survived because of our observance of the Shabbat. A few more things to note here. In the Torah, I'm now talking a little bit about Shabbat here in particular. In the Torah, the laws of Shabbat appear immediately after the commandment to begin the construction of the temple. The rabbis understood that to convey the message that even for something as holy as the building of the temple, Shabbat takes precedence. You may not engage in even other holy acts on the Shabbat. And the way that plays out for us in our world today is it refutes those who might tend to relax the observance of Shabbat for noble spiritual causes, such as the collection of tzedakah, or going out and helping people, unless they're immediately in your environment. Shabbat is a day in which Shabbat takes priority over all of those needs, unless life is at stake. Okay? So that's why doctors can go into hospitals and nurses, etc. When life is at stake and you might be saving somebody's life, it's one thing. Giving to a tzedakah can, you know what, just give twice as much on Sunday. It won't make a difference, okay, if you give it on Saturday or Sunday. Going out and helping the poor, yes, 6 days a week, go do it, all right? So if you feel somehow disempowered by the inability to do it on Shabbat, make sure you do it on Sunday. Shabbat is a day to step away unless a life is at stake. We come now to the third paragraph. The third paragraph is about as particularistic a text as we find in Judaism. I'm going to read it to you in the English. It says, "You have not granted this day, Adonai our God, to other peoples of the world, nor have you granted it, our sovereign, as a heritage to idolaters. Nor do others share in its rest. For you have given Shabbat in love to your people Israel. May the people who revere the seventh day find satisfaction and delight in your generosity. You have chosen the seventh day and made it holy, declaring it most precious, a day recalling the work of creation." I have found that this message is uncomfortable. And if there's one paragraph in the Amidah for which I have yet to hear a congregational melody, that paragraph is it. Okay? That's the one. It celebrates the fact that the Shabbat was given to the Israelites and not, and by the way, the idolaters, the word idolaters is already an interpretation, because what it says is, V'gam b'menuchato, and his rest, lo yishkanu arelim. He has not given that rest to the uncircumcised. Now, in the older prayer book, and that's the traditional text. I don't know why they went back to it, but if you go back to the old Silverman Siddur, what it said was, V'gam b'menuchato lo yishkanu rishaim, who has not granted his rest to the wicked. I don't like the uncircumcised because it's an attack on Christianity. And so when I say this paragraph in Hebrew, even before the congregation, you will hear me not say arelim. I use a different word. I use the old rishaim, figuring if it was good enough for the rabbis who wrote the Siddur I knew as growing up, then there's validity to it. Okay? So I go back and I say rishaim. I don't say arelim, because to me it's bad enough. Well, it's not bad, but this paragraph is saying we are particularistic, but it doesn't have to include what I see as an attack. Other cultures have a day of rest. We have Shabbat. Whoever wrote this text knew that Christians observe a day of rest. They knew that Muslims observe a day of rest, but that doesn't undermine the Jewish claim that ours is different. For Christians, Sunday is the Lord's Day when Jesus is resurrected. For Muslims, Friday is Jum'ah, the day of gathering, the day on which reflects the day that humans were created. Again, we have the same tradition that humanity was created on the sixth day of creation. Oh, that's what the Bible says. So that's what they celebrate. We are celebrating rather the connection with God on the seventh day of resting. So even though they have a day of rest, it has a completely different meaning for both Christians and Muslims. And that's how it's different. I'm going to stop there. And I'm going to take questions. Questions can be on anything from any of the texts to the centrality of Shabbat. So I'm open to questions at this point, and I only see on my, because I have an iPad, I only see 9. I'll keep skimming through. If I see a hand raised or I hear a voice, I'll take the question. All right, go.
Very good.
It's not possible I answered everything. Leslie, thank you, because I couldn't have gotten everything.
Third paragraph.
Below the top.
Right. Descendants of Jacob, whom you have chosen. So how do the non-Jews usually respond? Like, what do you mean you're chosen? Do you think you're better than we are? Or this is just establishing that your history goes back to Jacob, because I selected Jacob.
All right, so I'll address the issue very briefly. We've talked about it once, and I'm going to talk about it when we get to Aleinu again, but I'll briefly address it here, okay? Because there is no question, it permeates our text. We get to the blessing before the Torah reading, Asher Bachar Banu, who has chosen us. Mikol, I mean, from among all people. It's clear, okay? It's in the Kiddush. It's in the Aleinu. It's here. What does chosenness mean? And for much of history, Jews were not uncomfortable with this concept because when the world persecutes you, you find special meaning in being chosen by God as a way of rising above it. In our world, it's a little less comfortable. And so we've seen new interpretations emerge which suggest that different people are chosen in different ways, okay? That Jews are chosen for the covenant. There's no question that non-Jews are not responsible to the covenant. They have seven commandments that are the rest of the world. We have 613. Okay, and so it really has here. I think for the modern world, it's a sense of chosen to observe all the mitzvot. If you don't choose them to observe, Michael, I see your hand. If we don't choose to observe the mitzvot, then we're not chosen. We have to choose to be chosen.
Okay.
Okay, Michael.
Well, just adding to that, my experience is that I've had numerous acquaintances and friends who are Christian who they don't take offense to that because they see themselves as part of that chosen group because they've adopted what they call the Old Testament. They see themselves as just an extension of that, and they don't take offense to that.
So they may not take offense, but the reality is some of it is not an awareness, because in reality, let me give you two pieces about Christianity that are far more difficult than this statement as a Jew. Christianity, first of all, starts out with supersessionism, which means that it's not that they too are now the people referred to here. Jews have been eclipsed. Jews are no longer the chosen people. With the destruction of the temple, we lost our chosenness. They are the chosen people, and we are not. Add one more piece to it. You take, and this is not true of all Christianity, but certainly many believe the only way to get to heaven is to believe in Jesus.
Right.
If that isn't chosenness, tell me what is.
Yep.
All right. I would take a more universalistic approach, and that is to say that God can have a relationship with different groups of people in different ways. We are chosen for this covenant, and we only are chosen if we choose to opt in. Other people can have different relationships with God. That's fine. I don't see it as this is the only one, but I do see it as we've been chosen for this one. I don't know if it's not a perfect answer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Good answer.
Okay. Anybody else?
Good answer.
All right. Thank you all. Next week we'll continue on with the Amidah and keep playing.
Shkoyach.
Good Shabbos, everyone.
Okay.
Shabbat
Thank
shalom.
you.
Shabbos.